Hello and welcome everyone to We'll Be Right Back, the future of hospitality. On We'll Be Right Back, we interview people from every corner of the service and hospitality industry, as well as representatives from organizations providing relief and resources as we learn how to manage and settle into this new reality after COVID-19. I am your host, Greg Tilton. I am joined today by my co-producer and amazing sister, Elizabeth Tilton. Elizabeth is the founder of Oyster Sunday, a veteran in the service and hospitality world, an all-around professional badass. I have a duty as her brother to knock her down a peg at every opportunity, but when it comes to her professional experience and business acumen, I simply can't do it. Her company, Oyster Sunday, has been at the forefront of providing valuable advice and services to the restaurant industry during these difficult times. Today, we're going to talk about a new resource her team has launched, the Reopening Critical Path. But before we do that, Elizabeth, welcome to the show. I guess technically your show.
Thank you. First off, what an intro, Gregory. My goodness. Hi, Greg. Although we are miles away, I'm in the French Quarter and you're uptown. Still feel like we're at least closer than when I was in New York, so I'm appreciative of that. But yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background. I'll make it quick and swift on this one. I'm originally going to go to medical school and then decided in my early 20s to pivot and to actually, or some would say go rogue, and decided to actually move down to New Orleans to professionally cook. And in college, I had started a catering company, so kind of always had the culinary bug. And after a couple of years of cooking down here, I had the opportunity to move to New York to work for Momofuku, and I was a front of house manager at Sambar in the East Village, and then ended up in about 8 months moving up to corporate, where I joined the branding and marketing team. And on that team, I was responsible for all the international partnerships on behalf of Momofuku. So that included the World Bank and Patagonia and Noma and Copenhagen, their MAD symposium. So it really kind of ran the gamut, had a national or international scale, and was managing the marketing in New York and then managing the market expansion analysis for as Momofuku was expanding out into like DC and thinking about that opening on a marketing side. Eventually joined the design team at a company called W&P, and we did our own proprietary products. We're totally vertically integrated. So we managed design through distribution and had about 300 products to market, including products with Williams-Sonoma, West Elm, Lucasfilms. And it was just really an unbelievable opportunity of really seeing how companies are built and how to really build teams and manage teams. And it was an unbelievable 4 years.
That job really stands out to me as a real transition point in your career. I mean, that was when the scale and the macro level view you took on with businesses seemed to really flourish.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely, this just being able to see 30,000 feet up and visual step that you make when setting up a business and the decisions you make and how it impacts everything in the future. It just understanding structure is really what was a huge value, and how to manage. I think managing is difficult and should not be, is when you find a good manager, appreciate them because it's hard to find them. And I think that it takes a lot of work to be able to manage people. At the end of the day, I wrote a business plan down back in 2012 for what now has become Oyster Sunday. And what it is, Oyster Sunday stands for operating system. We are a hospitality service group based between New Orleans and New York. Our mission is to reimagine a sustainable and supportive infrastructure for food and beverage industry. And basically what that means is we are a corporate office for independent restaurants. So we are providing services that normally, if you're in a restaurant group, so let's bring Momofuku back up, for example. When you're working or you're a chef in a restaurant group such as that, you have finance and accounting and marketing and branding and all of these amazing resources at your disposal that roll up to a corporate level because they can service many, many different brick and mortars and restaurants. So my opinion, there's no reason why that same thing can't be applied to independents, because every independent restaurant needs that. But the way it's currently structured is that a chef or an owner operator becomes the CFO, the CMO, the CEO, all, and the head of HR, all on the first day they open their doors, or before that, actually. And in many ways, that just is not setting them up for success or giving them any sort of economy of scale or negotiating power. So what we provide a corporate office to allow many independent restaurants to have access to those resources to build sustainable and strong business.
Well, on that note, obviously things have changed a lot. And with the advent of COVID-19, the businesses that have had to shutter or radically pivot and alter their service, your services in a lot of ways are more valuable than ever because people are running on lower income as businesses, as individuals, and your back of house services, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is you're doing in kind, and you started that nearly out the gate weeks ago, just immediately turned to people you're already working with, people you had relationships with, and said, we're all in this together, and I'm here to help. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of your transition to your in-kind services and what you've been doing? And then I think that'll be a great way to bring us into the critical path.
Yeah, definitely. So, right, and actually, it was interesting. I was up in New York because I traveled between New York and New Orleans to meet with the team, and I was up in New York on March 9th through the 11th. And this is right when we had heard winds of COVID. We knew it was going on around the world. We knew it was coming to the States. We didn't know the capacity, I'm sorry, the scale in which it was going to be an issue. And I remember sitting in a meeting on the 11th in the middle of Manhattan, and I heard that the WHO had issued a pandemic. And I closed my laptop, walked out the door, and went straight to the airport, knowing that I had to get home. And I think for me, that's when it really solidified that this was real. And and you could feel how heightened it was in New York. I mean, it was so tense, and you just kind of, it was palpable. And in that moment, we really sat down, and that was on a Wednesday. And by Friday, had identified what we were going to do about it. And we're starting to see that Cuomo was making announcements in New York that things were closing and it was mandated and everything started shuttering. So we decided at that point that we were going to hold all of our contracts and to provide all of our services for free, provide free consultation to any operator. Maybe we had talked to them before, or we didn't know them yet, but anything was fair game and no question was too big or too small. And as we started making that public, we actually got this really amazing response from our community, more on the services side. So we had lawyers offering pro bono, like only managing rent abatement and how to navigate that, or heads of HR departments at huge restaurant groups offering to answer any question we had concerning furlough versus layoff versus benefits reinstatement, anything that we could get our hands on. And people were just doing it for free because we understood that, like, and I think it's something that we actually learned during Katrina to kind of, I mean, we all have our own story for that. But the one thing that we learned in that is that, if we all sacrifice a little bit, none of us have to sacrifice it all. And so I think that mentality became really clear pretty quick. So we decided by that Monday, so this is on Wednesday, by Monday, we had a full website up for resources, aggregating a bunch of information from around the United States, and then also offered to our entire network all of our services and for free consultations. So we are continuing to do that, and we will continue to do that until we start seeing these doors reopen.
Well, that's a good place as any, really, to segue into our main discussion today, because the reopening critical path, which y'all have been laying out and have provided to everybody, is clearly a natural evolution of these services and partnerships you've been doing with businesses locally. I imagine these conversations with HR, lawyers, etc., kind of built the foundation for this. So could you tell us a bit about the reopening critical path? For those who don't know, it's on their site. It's a interactive tables and information, basically just wonderful resource. And I'd love for you to kind of tell us more about it and who should be using it and what will it offer them?
I think we should probably first do is establish what we do know. There's so many variables that we can't predict, but we can distill down what we can make sense of as of today. We believe at the root that every single restaurant, there is foundational tasks that operators can set up in advance of opening their doors that really set them up for success for weeks to come. And I think for us, we understand it to be, it allows people to prepare for operational hurdles ahead. There's going to be a bunch of new COVID-19 policies and protocols that are going to impact your daily operations that we need to get ahead of to think about before you even open. And in general, I think to kind of take a bigger, like a 30,000 foot view, we understand that COVID is going to be cyclical. It's not going away. When I mean cyclical, I mean that we've had this in the spring, and we do anticipate that until we have a vaccine, there's going to be spikes in COVID that will require additional mandated distancing or lockdown. When lockdowns do get relaxed a bit, they're not going to get lifted fully by any means. And that's arguably until we actually receive a vaccine. And most importantly, restaurants are not going to go back to normal. Whatever your normal service was, your normal menu, how many menu items you had, we need to shake that all up and really start cutting it down and reevaluating based off of really like what does your business now look like as of April 23rd, 2020. And then some other things are, at the end of the day, food insecurity is growing. And to dovetail into that, I mean, feeding a hyper local community is going to be vital. So a lot of restaurants they're coming from this idea of like, what does it mean to be on a national scale of a restaurant? And what does it mean to get accolades? What does it mean to feed and to have people travel to you? The reality is that model is going to be suspended for a while, and you need to feed your neighbors and you need to feed your community. And at the end of the day, when it comes to feeding them, like supply chains disrupted. There's a bunch of vendors that circulate around restaurants that are reliant on a B2B service. And those supply chains have now reduced their stock. So when you do open your doors, you need to consider, what do you need? And you need to be talking to your vendors now to really get there. And then when it comes to standard operating procedures, so we call them SOPs, which you'll find a lot within the critical path, we envision that there's going to be mandated requirements for what standard operating procedures. So when you're thinking about food handling and delivery and how many times you have to wash your hands, all those roll into an SOP on behalf of operations. And we do envision that personal protective equipment, so people will often hear that as referred to as PPE, that will also be mandated. So maybe every front of house manager and any front of house team or back of house has to be wearing masks and gloves to serve. And it's going to be on a state by state basis. At least in the States it will be. There will be some federal mandates, but we anticipate that it will mostly be on a state by state basis. And just a couple more quick ones. Customers are going to dictate our future, and we can anticipate what we think they want to the best of our ability. But when it comes to how much delivery we do, or if they're going to come to sit at our bar or dine inside, they're really going to be the ones that predict it. So keep your ear to the ground and ask questions and make sure that you're super clearly communicating with them as much as you can, because the more information they know, the more they trust you, and the more likely they are to come dine with you when they have to make a decision. If they're only dining out once a week because of the risk, you want to make sure that you're top of their list.
I think you've set the stage really well. And with that in mind, let's kind of dive into it. I mean, we don't necessarily need to go point by point, but tell me a bit about the reopening critical path. What's kind of its function? How are people supposed to use it? Who is it for?
So critical paths in general, broad strokes, like things that are just line item by line item need to be executed and done in order to get to your final goal. It's setting up the groundwork for what tasks you have to do, who's responsible for it, where it's the status of it, and when do you anticipate it being done? Because it really gives like kind of a global view as things are impacting one another and whose responsibilities it lies on. They have transparency into how and which to manage the opening. To that point, we're kind of taking in like a reopening and looking to it like an opening of a restaurant. There's a lot of things in our reopening critical path that we did not include because they are very specific to openings. But for the sake of this, the reopening one is really meant to think through everything that was comprehensive about how and which to open your doors back up. So the topics we touch on broadly include finance, accounting, operations, human resources, marketing, communication, technology, compliance and insurance, and then finally facilities. We decided to make this critical path totally public. And the reason why we did that is because, I'm a strong believer that we pretty much have two paths forward. And one is to, run to the front of the line, be there alone ahead of everyone, or the other one is to get there together. And I think that if we are all able to really open up communication and to open up what knowledge we have, we're going to do the latter part of that. And for me, as a real big extrovert, if quarantine's taught me anything, is that we're much better doing it together. And I'm definitely going to opt in for that option.
So there's a lot going on under the hood with this thing, right? You've got so many different elements under there. And let's say I run, whether it's a 20-person operation, 50-person operation, or just a small mom pop type po' boy shop, right? I take a look at this. I'm on your website. Where should I start?
Number one, and we do prioritize, we actually laid it out in priority on the website. So hopefully it helps individuals navigate that more and operators navigate that. But we always sit there and say, you got to start with cash on hand. It's a delicate subject because not many people have, restaurants always run very lean, and it's hard right now to identify where cash on hand is. But I think the things that we kind of laid out were immediately identify what cash is in the bank. Then you got to determine if you have any outstandings, accounts payables or accounts receivable, just to know really where you are with your vendors and if you have any outstanding that they owe you. And then the third step would be to really determine when and how to hire. I think I won't go into this too much today because we could have an entire podcasts about the PPPL loans and the SBA loans from the federal government in association with the CARES Act. But I think the one thing that we need to be very clear about is that there have been some restaurants and some operators who've received PPP loans. And, there's an inclination to want to rehire to cap out on that loan. But an operator really needs to be thinking through, what does your operations actually look like and how many people do you actually need to execute that? Because it doesn't do the restaurant any good and it doesn't do your employees any good to hire them on with no work when they could be compensated on unemployment, because in the end of the day they would be unemployed if you did not feel the pressure in which to hire them. So I think we could talk a bunch about that, but it directly affects your cash flow and it directly affects just how you're operating. So you got to really quickly determine that.
Well, that really coincides with a lot of what the interviews I've had so far have said, right? So many of them, I mean, you have owners dipping into their savings to help their staff. You've got people like out the gate saying, we have enough to give you 2 weeks of pay, 3 weeks of pay, or offering people, hey, you can be furloughed or you can quit. No harm, no foul. You get 2 weeks pay and you're out. And yeah, I mean, identifying the cash on hand, regardless if they're following your path or not, seems to be a very important step that businesses are taking.
Yeah, it's the number one metric. I mean, in terms of making decisions, because again, this is going to impact your menu. It's going to impact your table turns, what your hours of operation, your labor force. It's going to impact a lot of things that we'll kind of touch on briefly in the future. But it's just the number one thing you have to do. And there's just two more quick points to that is after you determine your labor, you really need to determine how long you can sustain operations with the current cash flow. And then finally, identifying what revenue you needed on a daily or weekly basis in order to break even. So you don't keep just taking away at that cash, because obviously the most important part is to let it grow. And then at the end of the day, everything else on the critical path will follow.
Every business probably has to do that. Maybe you don't have as many HR needs. Maybe you don't have as many, technological needs or licensing needs, right? Maybe you've got other ducks in a row, or they're just not core parts of your business. Maybe you're a small operation, but everyone has to know how much runway they have.
Absolutely. And one thing I think to kind of dovetail into the cash on hand conversation is, when a lot of restaurants you rely on your initial model, you have budgets that you're working with in P&Ls and you're looking at your numbers. But I think right now we would recommend that you kind of build out a 12-week budget, and understanding that there's going to be variables that you have to start baking in. For example, your first 12 weeks out the gate, you're going to be looking at a lean staff. You're going to look at majority delivery or takeout only. You're going to look at a pared down menu, and also trying to think through, if you're doing inventory, can you create caps on it? Can you sit there and say, we are only allowed to buy this much inventory and sit on this much, and work with your vendors and buying in bulk, or work on and have redundancy of what ingredients you're using within your menu to make sure that you at least alleviate waste. There's things like that just all of it should bake back into your budget. I also say, and this is not meant to be an alarmist, but I would recommend that you budget out for your worst case scenario and a good case scenario, just to know, because when it comes down to break even, you just really need to know what those numbers are. And also in terms of beyond cash flow and budget, the last thing we'll say on general operating costs for restaurants on the finance tab is, you really need to identify, and I think a lot of restaurants, when they're closing their doors, looked at their fixed costs. So you're thinking about monthly subscriptions for your POS system and your inventory structure, and any sort of just fixed cost. And the main one is rent. We kind of, in the intro, alluded to rent abatement and helping people think through that. I think some people were able to negotiate with their landlords about deferral or rent relief. And I think that the number one, we have a really great lawyer, Drew Macklin from Cook Farber up in New York. And he's been really great about talking to people through rent abatement and deferrals. And the one thing he made a good point of is that if you were able to discuss that with your landlord and were able to get deferral, he highly recommends that you make sure that's in writing, because real estate's now going to be affected as all these restaurants close and retail closes, that you want to make sure that you have an addendum or an additional clause in your contract that if they were to sell the building, that it's adhered to. So just making sure things like that are very clear and concise. The critical path talks a bunch about renegotiating vendor terms and renegotiating all this. And one thing that we would recommend on the rent side is considering, if your landlord's willing, is to figure out if you can bake in a base rate for your rent, and then do a percentage of revenue on top of that. So at least they know they can always receive a monthly fee, but they're able to ebb and flow with you as your business tries to sift out into this new reality.
It's interesting as you talk about this to kind of step back slightly. When you're talking about paring down menus and delivery only, in one of my pre-calls the other day, someone brought up something I hadn't heard yet that I feel like I've been mulling over a lot lately. Their words were, for all I know, this could be the death of fine dining. And I think they were being a little obviously hyperbolic. But their point was, as we scale back and pare down menus and do all this stuff, how do you keep your value proposition? How do you keep the Commander's Palace experience? How do you keep all these elements when we're going to be rethinking the entire staff? And I think what's so great about the critical path is, in some ways, you might be helping provide an answer, because instead of saying, how do we keep being Commanders, or how do we keep being Frankie and Johnny's, right? You're basically saying, we're going into a new reality. Here's the steps to take care of your nuts and bolts. But you're also talking about your supply lines. You're talking about your resources, and you're talking about how do we create the new Frankie and Johnny's and the new Commander's Palace, and at the same time keep our commitment to the products we love. Like, if I run a po' boy shop, I keep running that example into the ground, but like, I want to keep making delicious po' boys. I want people to come in, sit at the countertop and have a beer. It's interesting because I do think, as I looked through the reopening critical path, I at least got a sense that it allows me to start answering the question, not just of how do I stay open, or rather reopen, but how do I not preserve, but keep the spirit of my experience going.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if we were gonna go back to your po' boy example, I think it's more of the decision of saying, if you say you have a debris po' boy like Mother's or anyone else that has like roast beef and gravy and whatnot, the reality is that that can't be delivered unless you make a decision on your end that if that po' boy is like Gregory's Po' Boy Shack's like best offering, then you need to consider how it's being transported. Because then you need to think about, does the gravy go on the side? Does that impact it? You don't want a customer to receive that and it's soggy, because that's not Gregory's Po' Boys. Operators have to be thinking through, like, a Bananas Foster's can't be delivered. And did you have to sit there and say, what is core to your business model and what is core to your identity and what are you not willing to waver on, and what things just really can't exist right now? Or can you think about alternative revenue, like revenue streams, to make those products come to life? So if I will use the Bananas Foster as example, say Commander starts doing takeout and they're able to offer most of their menu. They pare it down. They have a couple of killer options. It's family style for their restaurant, comes to your home. And again, let me reiterate, this is an example. This is not real. Is able to come to your home, feed 4 people, and then they give you all the ingredients you need to do Bananas Foster at home. To me, that is an experience that is interactive with your family. It's a value add and value prop for them. It's ingredient and no labor. And it's still, if it's a core product on behalf of Commander's Palace and you as a consumer want it, they give you the option to opt in. And I think that those are things where people have to identify for themselves. But we're offering the critical path is for you to start thinking through those questions of, like, what is your value? What is your point of view and your voice in delivery or in the offerings you're providing? You have to identify for yourself what that is.
Exactly. That's what I was getting as I was reading it, right? I just was going, it's not about returning to normalcy or providing the thing. It's, how do I create a parallel or similar or preserve the things that can be? And you're asking the questions, and you have this guide that will help me get as close to my objectives as possible and hopefully achieve all of them. I really do feel like you've built a wonderful roadmap here for people.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. When we could talk through every department, we could go through a bunch of stuff, but I would say, like, the main takeaway is that know your numbers, take care of your people, and communicate so clearly. Communicate on every external, your website, your social, update your Google listings, your Yelp listings, make sure your menus are up to date, because consumers need to figure out how to know what you're doing, and that you can't assume they do. And the more you communicate both to your team, and that includes everything from safety protocols and handbooks and training manuals and all that stuff at this point, when doors are not open, can be built and can prepare you for success, that when you're thinking about risk management and compliance and insurance, all of those things are rolled in to protect you, your team, your business, and your vendors. And I think that those fundamental things need to start now, or if they haven't already. And I know there's a lot of variability and a lot of decisions people have to make. And we're really hoping that this critical path really helps to break it down into bite-sized pieces where it feels manageable. And also, if there's things in there that don't apply to your business, scrap them, delete them. It's all good. But we really do hope that it's a comprehensive, runway for people to understand what they do have at their disposal. And like at the end of the day, for us, like at Oyster Sunday, we believe that information is not only powerful, but it's crucial to facing uncertainty and for us all to find a path forward. So we just really hope that this critical path provides that.
I would definitely describe it as modular in the way you're saying that. Apply the sections that work for you. I think that you can definitely pick and choose the sections and make good judgment calls. And it's not that every little element depends on you doing the previous part. It's very strikingly modular. And I imagine as a restaurant owner that it would be incredibly useful. However, I am not one, so I cannot say. So you should all go to the website and try it yourself.
Thank you. Yes. The website is oystersunday.com/critical path. Again, I want to reiterate that we are taking free consultations for any and all operators, maybe in the New Orleans area or elsewhere in the United States. So please get in touch with us. It's hello@oystersunday.com. And really, again, no questions too big or too small. We'll find an answer.
Obviously, the website will be in the show notes with a direct link to the Reopening Critical Path. Highly encourage you to check it out. It's an amazing resource. Do you have any other places for people to find you?
Yeah, you actually also can find us on Instagram. It's our main social platform at Oyster Sunday. And then we also are on Facebook and LinkedIn if those are platforms that you use. But we can find us on all three of those.
I know there are so many more elements we could cover about this. It is so comprehensive, yet so streamlined. I think this is an amazing, I keep saying the word resource that you've provided for people. And I really encourage people to check it out. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a blast. It is so fun working with you in a more professional capacity now. I hope people found this conversation enlightening.
Thank you so much, Gregory. It's been awesome working with you on this podcast and having the opportunity to get out the critical path a little bit further and talk about it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, and you take care.
All right. Love you.
Love you too. Thank you so much for listening to We'll Be Right Back, the future of hospitality. Each episode, we will be highlighting a different organization contributing to the relief effort here in New Orleans. This episode, we would like to highlight Chef's Brigade. Chef's Brigade is a collection of New Orleans restaurants, chefs, and servers feeding healthcare workers and first responders while financially supporting our independent restaurants, culinary talent, and service industry. To contribute to the cause and learn about this amazing initiative, head to chefsbrigadenola.org. We have a link in the show notes. Again, that's chefsbrigadenola.org. We'll Be Right Back is produced by me, Greg Tilton. My co-producers are Barry Schwartz of My House Events and Elizabeth Tilton of Oyster Sunday. Barry and Elizabeth are offering incredible resources and services during this time through their New Orleans-based businesses, as well as collecting and sharing various initiatives by other individuals and organizations. All of these are linked in the show description, so please make sure to check them out. You can follow us on Twitter for the latest updates and to let us know what's up, @RightBackNola. Please also consider leaving a review for us on whatever podcast platform you fancy. It helps us know what you think, and it helps people find the show. Our cover art was created by Eugenie McClellan. Our show's music was produced by Sarisu. We have links to their work in the show notes, so give them some love.